Welcome back to Beyond the Surface. I'm your host, Ezer Gil, and here we aim to have God-centered, meaningful conversations relevant to students and young adults. This is the second part of our Q&A episode, where we answer the remaining questions submitted to us by our listeners. Our season finale will be released later this week, so be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube to catch up on all the previous episodes. Thank you for joining us for the final few episodes, and we're so excited to finish strong this season of Beyond the Surface. What are your hobbies and how'd you get into them?
I have a lot of hobbies. I feel like probably the biggest one, the one that I do the absolute most, is golf. I love to golf. My friends from high school, like my best friends from high school, were really into it, and I had not played a whole lot because of baseball. I didn't want to get into golf, but then they convinced me to come out on the golf course, and I think I played like once and I was awful at it, but that was history. Now I probably play more than I should, but I love getting out there. I'm out there multiple times a week. I like playing video games. Same thing, just something that I can do with my friends. I like anything competitive, so whether that be board games, yard games, anything like that. If there's a win to that, like if you can win it, I like to play it. So yeah, I'm really into that. And then I just love to be outdoors. So anything camping, hiking, kayaking, all that kind of stuff I really like. I don't really know how I got into all that. I just know that I like to be outdoors. So
we already hit on this before, but all things music, I really love creating. I love just jamming out with friends just on various instruments. I have a lot of instruments here at home. You can see some of them from here, but I just love just getting together, just jamming out and just creating something new. And, I've even tried my hand at songwriting before. So music's a big thing. I really enjoy reading as well. I would like to read more, but I love going to Barnes & Noble and seeing all the new releases and checking it out. A lot of it is faith literature I like to read. I'm not, really into fiction or anything, but this is a weird one. But I wasn't even sure if this is even a hobby, but I really love taking people out to eat. I don't know why, but I just love doing it. It's like one of my favorite things to do. And I feel like you learn so much about somebody. And I particularly love one-on-one, not like in a big group. Like I'm fine with going out as a group. When I was younger, I would actually prefer that. But as I've gotten older, I really just want to sit down with somebody by themselves and just really just dissect them and just hear their story and hear how they've been, whether I've known them for a long time or whether I'm just now meeting them for the first time. Like if you ever meet me, I'm going to offer like, hey, let's go to Culver's or something. I really love going to Culver's. So if that's a hobby in and of itself, but yeah, going out with people, I think it's pretty fun. So yeah, not really a hobby, but it's pretty fun.
This says, what is the most challenging part of living out your faith? And again, I think there's two parts of this that are equally challenging for me. I would say first and foremost, it's worrying too much about what others are going to think of me, which in some regards, I am very much my own person. I own who I am. I'm very comfortable in my own skin. I do a lot of crazy and ridiculous things. My brother recently got married. I was the only one out on the dance floor, and I was out there all night, and I have no idea what I'm doing dancing. I don't care what people think of me in that space. But for some reason, there is just something about the Christian faith that, for whatever reason, it can be scary to advertise that to people sometimes, or to really like live it out with people that, not that I've ever been judged. I've caught flack for it a couple times in my life. Like people have said, why do you believe that? Like genuinely, because like they don't, out of malice, I guess. I've been called the weird religious kid before, not by anybody that I really am close with, so it shouldn't bother me that much. But I would say, yeah, just the fear of like what other people are going to think of me. And then two, I guess the temptation of like what the world offers, right? How often is it the popular people that are like super religious and super faithful, like in the, public's eye? Like not all that often. So sometimes like that desire to like influence a lot of people or like to have a lot of people in my circle can sometimes creep in, and like the desires of the world can kind of sneak their way in like via that avenue. So I think that it's just a matter of being mindful of those things. Who cares what those people really think? Because in the end, I'm living for an audience of one, and I'm going to serve my God because that's ultimately what's going to matter in the end. And then also to just like kind of getting over the thought of wanting to be popular or like wanting success in the world's eyes, because in the end, like if you've ever had conversations with people like in intimate moments where you're able to encourage them through your faith, those are where you can really impact people. And I remember specifically having moments with people who I know were not believers, and I just said, hey, can I pray with you? And, you know, after we finished, they were in tears and they just said, you know, that's one of the nicest things anybody's ever done for me. Like those moments of significance mean so much more. And so just kind of remembering those things helped me to get through that.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on caring what other people think and worrying about what they're going to do. And for me, kind of similarly, is laying myself down and just not making life all about me, pursuing God's will and ultimately putting other people before me, and actually loving my enemies and loving those who ignore me or despise me. It's such a humbling and such a difficult part of this walk of life is just contending with this idea that, hey, life is not all about you. Life is not all about you. You're not everything. You're not entitled to all these things. And, you know, yeah, you have your job and your car and everything, but get out of your head. Get out of your world. Step into somebody else's world. Enter into their reality and change it. Serve them. I've found myself really studying how Jesus would look after the people who were overlooked in society and people who were just kind of written off and ignored. That can take so many different forms and so many different cultures. And I just sort of like feel like, especially in today's culture and in America, like some of the people who are written off are people who have like a disability in their speech or in their hearing or in their talk, or maybe they're on the spectrum or something. And God's just sort of been convicting me like, yeah, you could go minister to somebody else who has like all their senses working, but why don't you go minister to that person? Why don't you share them the good news? And it's just been kind of a conviction. I consider that a faith struggle. I consider that a tug between what I want to do and what God is laying on my heart to do. So ultimately just laying down my will and going after the people who are overlooked and the people who are just kind of written off and ignored, even when other of my Christian brothers and sisters aren't doing the same thing. Am I going to go out there and do it myself and do what God has laid me to do? Or am I just going to keep on walking by and just forget about them and ignore them? That's a huge struggle for me. Do you know all the books of the Bible? Better yet, can you sing them? I know who asked this question.
Yeah, I know who asked this too.
Do you think we could do it together?
I can't sing them.
I
don't.
We probably won't be able to sing them.
Okay, I was gonna say at one point in my life I did memorize a song, you know, to like help you learn the books of the Bible in order, but I don't remember it now.
Let's see if we can get through the entire Bible real quick. Okay, so we have Genesis,
Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. This is where I start to struggle.
I think it's 1st and 2nd Samuel.
Okay, 1st and 2nd Samuel.
And then 1st and 2nd Kings.
Yep, I was going to say 1st and 2nd Kings. Chronicles.
Yeah, both of them, yeah. I'm like saying both of them, obviously.
Yeah,
two,
first and 2nd Chronicles, yep. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job.
Yo, you are way better than me. I think at this point, this is where Psalms comes in.
Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon then.
Correct. And then Ecclesiastes after that.
Yep, Ecclesiastes.
And then I think Isaiah after that.
Yes, right. Isaiah is after Ecclesiastes, I believe. Yeah.
And then Jeremiah is right after that.
Uh-huh. Yep, we're getting into the major prophets there.
Major prophets.
Where's Daniel? Daniel's got to be coming in here soon, right?
Your microphone's on a Bible, but I'm resisting pulling it out right now.
Yeah, we can't do that. We just have to be honest here. So we're starting to struggle.
Yeah. I know there's like Daniel and Ezekiel. And
yeah, we're
like
missing Habakkuk. And
Habakkuk is somewhere in there. Micah's in there.
Yep.
Malachi is the end of it. Crap. We are.
Amos. And Obadiah.
Don't forget Zephaniah and Zechariah.
Yep. Haggai.
Joel. Don't forget Joel.
And Joel.
We're so out of order right now. I'm so sorry.
We're close. I think we have them all, but I don't know for sure because we went so far out of order.
Should we start in the New Testament now?
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously we got the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John.
Yep. Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians.
Then I think it gets into God eats potato chips. This is how I learned it.
Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians.
If you ever get those confused, remember God eats potato chips. Someone taught me that, and it's always helped me remember it.
Yep. So after Colossians, what do we have? I believe it's 1st and 2nd.
Oh,
is that right?
Are we getting into no, Corinthians,
not Corinthians.
Thessalonians?
Yeah, Thessalonians,
1st and 2nd, and then I think we're getting into 1st and 2nd Timothy.
Yep.
And then
1st, 2nd, 3rd John.
No. But before that, we have Titus and Philemon, and then James. No, and Hebrews, and then James.
Yep. and then
And
First
then
and
I
Second
think it's-
Peter, First, Second, Third John,
And then we got Jude.
and Revelation.
And then Revelation. Oh man, that was rough.
Yeah, not a good look, but that's okay. I guess we need to go back and memorize our
gotta
books
go
of the
back.
Bible. This is my question from youth the other night. What's your go-to nugget dipping sauce?
Oh man, it does depend where. If I'm at McDonald's, McDonald's buffalo dipping sauce is super underrated. Like their buffalo sauce is actually pretty great. If we're at Chick-fil-A, obviously Chick-fil-A sauce is wonderful. If I'm at Culver's, I don't know, probably just the ranch. I don't know, like it varies, I suppose, but I think Chick-fil-A sauce is like the supreme dipping sauce.
Yeah, I would agree, hands down. Chick-fil-A sauce is the best. If Chick-fil-A sauce is not available, I go for either sweet and sour or honey mustard.
These are very important questions here. Okay, taking a left turn here. What's your go-to method for getting into a spiritual conversation with someone to hopefully be able to share the gospel? That is a very good question. Let me repeat it. What's your go-to method for getting into a spiritual conversation with someone to hopefully be able to share the gospel?
I want to get to know the person first. Like that's what I want to put above everything. I want to show them that I care about them and I'm genuinely interested. From there, it's just kind of like any other conversation, I guess. It would be reading and kind of directing towards a spiritual conversation just via what comes up. So the easy ones, I had a conversation with somebody the other day that her husband was really sick and she was having a hard time taking care of him, and she's also trying to work and things like that. So that's almost easy to have a spiritual conversation. It's like, hey, can I pray for you? Yes, awesome. We prayed, and then we talked for a little while about the Spirit of God, basically. But I think, yeah, that for me, that's most important, is put the person first, be genuinely interested in what they have to say, and then allow the conversation and your mindset to be like, I love this person, so I want to share the gospel, and the conversation will lead you there.
I think that's really good about the conversation leading you there. I know for me, I would just say, and I know this isn't very specific, but allow it to happen naturally. I know when I went on my Middle East mission trip recently, that was actually what they taught us to do. They call it natural mode evangelism, where you're hanging out with someone and you're spending time with them. You're already doing life with them, and you're not like trying to go there to evangelize to them. That's more of a kind of direct confrontational thing, which is fine. And in some cases it's all right for that. I don't know. I just went on a business trip with somebody and, we got into talking about the Bible and about church. And we talked about some of his, reservations towards church and towards religion. And I don't even remember how it happened. I wasn't like, hey, what do you think about the Bible or Jesus or church? It just sort of happened naturally. I think I casually mentioned on the way, like, oh, that reminds me of the church I go to or something regarding something he said and something. And then the conversation just sort of naturally flowed there, I suppose. So that's my go-to method. To be completely honest, I'm not really all that great at the going up to someone and straight up just sharing the gospel with them. I'd like to become better at that. I think that there is a time and a place for that, and we do see a lot of that in the book of Acts and even in the life of Jesus, where Jesus is not dilly-dallying. He gets right down to business. So I think there's a time and place for that. So if that's kind of what you're asking, I don't really think I'm all that great on that. But if you're talking more of like people that you do life with, coworkers and friends and family members that you're with a lot, I would just say, when you're engaged in conversations, allow the conversation to naturally move to the spiritual, and people will get more comfortable with you and they will be willing to share what they think, and allow them to talk with you, allow them to disagree with you, allow them to point out some of the flaws in the errors that they think there are flaws and errors, and the times that they've been offended before, and just listen to them and just hear where they're coming from. And you don't have to shun them or tell them they're wrong or anything, but just hear their story, like Ryan was saying.
What are your plans for the future now that college is over / what are your next steps? So for this question, I'm going to medical school coming up in August. Ezra just started an engineering job, and that's where he sees his future for now, is just in the engineering sphere, trying to get better at his job and continuing to progress through the ranks. If you're interested in hearing more detailed answers, Producing Perseverance is all about my story. And then do you remember what your episode was called?
It was called Write the Vision.
Okay, and then Write the Vision would be the two where we share in detail what our next plans are.
All right, I really like this question. If you could sit down and have coffee with anyone in the world, who would it be?
Man, that's good. That's so hard. There's so many people that I would love to have a conversation with and pick their brain. I guess in a spiritual sense, I would like to have coffee with Pastor Ben Stewart from Passion City, DC. His messages were just super impactful for me and like a very difficult season that I was going through. And I guess just like really helped me to press into the Lord and kind of gave me encouragement to press into the Lord, and just kind of reminded me that like I'm loved and I'm a child of God.
Kind of a spiritual sense, John Maxwell, he is like a huge inspiration for me, particularly regarding speaking. And I feel like it would just be super cool just to pick his brain apart as well, and just to see kind of what he, kind of how he thinks and everything. I don't know, if we're talking like not necessarily spiritual, just somebody who I think is interesting or cool. I don't know if I should even say this, but if you've ever heard of the comedian and the YouTuber and the guy who does the Netflix specials, Bo Burnham, he's a really interesting person. I'm not even sure if this is going to make the cut, honestly, because I actually really don't recommend his stuff because they're very, very, very raunchy, and it's very out there, and I don't recommend consuming that. But he is a very interesting personality with a lot of interesting views on our culture and how it's progressing. So I think it'd be interesting to pick his brain.
Yeah, I would sit down with Joe Rogan for the same reason. I just think he's super interesting, and he's met with so many cool, different, diverse people that I think he would be a fun person to kind of pick their brain. And I think, you know, he's not a believer, so I think having a religious debate with him would be really interesting too. What is one of the funniest bloopers / goofs that has happened during our podcast recordings?
Well, I remember in season 1, we were talking about social media, and I think you actually kept it in there, but you had asked me permission if we should keep it in there, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it was, oh man, I don't even know if I should repeat it again.
You can repeat it again.
I was like joking around, like you were talking about how like social media and people are just posting whatever they want and it's getting really weird. And I had just like casually like blurped into the microphone. I was like, yeah, it's because everyone's on there is naked right now. And I can't believe I said that. And whatever.
You have had some really good one-liners. Not all of them make it in. One of my favorites, I think it's in the episode from this season when we were talking about heartbreak. This is just so funny to me. I don't know. Maybe nobody else will find this funny, but you go, I think what's the hardest thing about a breakup is that you're with someone and then you're not. And I just found that so funny. I was like, yep, that's very matter of fact, very blunt answer. Yes, it wasn't really a blooper, but some of the bloopers that we've had, which this has happened more than once, and you would think by the time we're in season 3 that we wouldn't have this issue, but we've started recording and then we get to do the editing and we don't have the audio. So that happened when we very first tried to launch the podcast, and then that still has happened a couple times here in season 3. So that's not super funny. That's just like a blooper that it's like, you would think at this point how many episodes in we would be a little better, but clearly we're not.
Should we tell them that we recorded David twice?
That was the one I was specifically referencing from season 3. We recorded the whole episode and then I go to edit it and I was like, well, this isn't going to work. So we had to redo it.
Hey, here's a quick one. Sweet or savory? I don't know what that means.
It's referring to food. Like, are you a sweet person? Do you have a sweet tooth, or do you prefer savory food?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I'm sweet all day. I love donuts, cake, ice cream.
What is savory then?
Like burgers, pizza, steak, stuff like that. I mean, obviously everybody has a little bit of both, but what do you?
I guess probably savory. Yeah, probably savory in more recent times, yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely be sweet. Give me all the ice cream. Why is seeking your next steps so challenging, and how can I be certain that it's the true path?
Ooh, that's a good one.
This is a good one. I would direct for a longer explanation to both the episode Write the Vision and Producing Perseverance, because that's where Ezra and I talk about our struggle with making sure that we were headed down the right path, that we were really going where God directed us.
And I really recommend What Am I Called to Do? That's another episode where we specifically dial into that question in particular. I kind of feel like we're just redirecting to other episodes, but I feel like we did answer it pretty well. But
I would just say, so why is seeking your next step so challenging? Because it's just like everything else in life. Like, God gives us free will. He allows us to choose. He doesn't just tell us specifically like, oh, you love me, so you're going to be a pastor. You love me, so you're going to do this. Like, he doesn't tell us. He gives us the free will to choose. So that's why it can be super challenging. But I want to encourage you just with, it's not something that God is like expecting us to get perfect, and it's not something that you have to be so focused and so worried about getting exactly right. Otherwise, you're going to miss God's purpose for you. God has a way of working all things for him and all things for the good of those who serve him. So if whatever you're doing, whatever you're seeking out, you're doing it out of, this is my passion and I want to love people through it and I want to shine for God through it, then I think you can be certain that you're on the right path. And if you're not, God will close the door. If the door is open, if the opportunity's there and your heart's in the right place, and in the right place, I mean, you're truly passionate about that, or that's truly something that you want to do, you're truly trying to love people through that, you believe that you can shine for God through whatever you're doing, then I think you're on the right path. And so you don't need to worry so much about like, oh God, do I go to this college or do I go to this college? Just be sure that your heart's in the right spot, and God will open and close the doors that he wants.
I have a feeling I know who asked this question, but I'm just going to say this. A lot of people are too concerned with what they are supposed to do, and they're not enough concerned with who they are supposed to be. You have to know who you are, and you have to know whose you are. When you know that, everything else will fall into place. It's kind of like what I talk about with Austin. You have to know your why. You have to know who. You have to know who am I called to be. And we've talked about this before, but like, man, find someone in the Bible whom you can model your life after and whom you can learn from. And ultimately, that person should be Jesus at the end of the day. But even someone else, know who you are is what I'm trying to say. Know who you are and discover that first. The calling will come with that. Why are there specific times for people to pass? Is it bad to assume they could have had a bigger impact? I think they're referring to someone passing away.
Passing away, yeah. You know, I don't know. I think that that's a deep question. That's a hard question. So why are there specific times for people to pass? And then is it bad to assume? I don't necessarily think it's just like any hypothetical. It can lead you down a dangerous road maybe, but I think in the end, we just have to remember that God's in control, and we don't get to understand some of these things because we're finite. We're here on earth. We don't get to understand why God chooses when certain people die and when others get to live. And we don't really get to choose either how big of an impact somebody has. It's kind of on God again to make those kind of things happen. You know, I know I'm not giving you a great answer other than just that's part of where faith comes in. It's just that God knows what he's doing, and God is going to take care of all of that. And we'll kind of come to realization when we get to heaven of what he was doing, I guess.
Oftentimes, kind of in the faith community, when someone passes away, you'll hear a lot of comments like, oh, well, like so-and-so died because God needed another angel in heaven or something, or this was God's plan, this was part of God's timing. And honestly speaking, I know this is kind of harsh, but I would really avoid statements like those. I would really avoid saying statements like them. And if someone says that to you about someone who's passed away, that's not proper doctrine and theology. God does not need angels in heaven. God's not thinking like, okay, I need someone up here, so I got to take someone out down there and bring them up here. Like, that's just not how it works. Like Ryan was saying, there are elements of this fallen world that we just don't understand. It's just so far beyond us to understand. I just remember with the passing of my aunt, when my aunt passed away, that honestly shook me in my faith. That really did. The weird thing is, and I talked about this in another episode, but it weirdly brought me closer to the Lord. It actually brought me like, Lord, I don't understand it. Why did this happen? And somehow in my anger and frustration, I was actually brought closer to the Lord. I spent more time with him, you know? But again, going back to your question, like, why is it that this happens? Like, what did the question actually say? Why are there specific times for people to pass? Your phrase of specific times, an aspect of me where when regarding God's sovereignty, I think, yeah, there are specific times that God already knows everything. But there's also like, this is just the nature of the fallen world that we live in. And I really don't believe it was God's will for us to be sick and to have died. God actually wants us to have life. And ultimately, he's promised us eternal life in heaven. And we have to remember, this world is so temporary. It is a vapor. It will be gone in the blink of an eye. We have hope, and we have this hope for a better future in heaven, the greatest of futures to ever be, the best possible outcome. In the end, we win. Even if we lose, we win. You know, the enemy can't have us because we are children of God. And this is why it's so important to be sharing the gospel with other people, to make sure that they're going to experience this future with us as well.
What steps should I take to maintain a solid faith walk and avoid living the roller coaster faith walk? How do I know that I'm at a good place in my faith journey? Again, we did an episode on this, so if you want to hear more about it, the roller coaster faith journey is up from this season. But one thing that I think that we missed for how to maintain a solid faith walk and remain consistent is your friend group. I don't think we talked about this in that episode, but just like reading this question, that's immediately what jumped out at me. So number one, to make sure that you're spending consistent time with God. And then number two, I would make sure that you have solid believers that you can talk to, and you can go over things like theology, and you can wrestle with certain things. You have people that you can talk to about your difficulties or your doubts or, whatever it may be. And you have people that you can look at and say, they're living out a really solid faith walk. I want to be more like that. And then how do you know that you're in a good place with your faith walk? Are you spending consistent time with God? Do you really look forward to that time with God and to time in church, time with other believers, worshiping and fellowshipping? Also, are you kind of wrestling with some things? Like, I know when I feel that I'm at my peak with God, or like I'm really solid with God, I feel convicted of certain things and I want to make changes, or I want to impact certain people or certain things in certain ways. And it's kind of like a wrestling, like what Ezra mentioned earlier, there's a little bit of a tension. It's difficult, but I want to do this thing because I feel like God's put it on my heart.
What does obedience look like? I think obedience, again, is laying down what you desire and laying down your opinions and your way of doing things in submission to the one who is commanding you and who is asking you to do something. That is obedience. When your parents ask you to do something and you don't feel like doing it, that is an opportunity for you to obey. I remember it was actually my brother who explained this to me. He was explaining that a lot of people think that submission is doing what people tell you to do, but that's not entirely true. Submission is when you intentionally forsake your ideas and your desires and your way of doing things for someone else, meaning that there must be a disagreement there. When you are doing something that someone asks you to do that you know is a good idea and that you personally believe in, you think is a good idea, then that's not actually submission. That's just going along with them because your and them is in the same spot. But when there's disagreement and when there is tension there and when the person who is in authority of you is asking you to do something that you don't want to do, that's your opportunities to submit and to obey. God's word explains that all authority on earth has been appointed by him on his authority. So even everyone out there, all the politicians, all the policemen, all the people, the schools and the professors and everyone that you kind of struggle with and kind of have some beef with, all of them have been appointed by God. They're not all godly, but it is our choice, and it is our choice as believers to submit to their authority and to obey them no matter what. God sees that. And he honors us and he blesses us as a result of that. But we have to be honoring of authority, even the people that we don't like and even the people we disagree with, because that is what obedience looks like.
So our last question here, I think, ties really well into the obedience question. When and how do you step out in faith? And this is just a matter of obedience. And I can't explain it to you. There are certain things that we have to be obedient on. God gives us the 10 commandments, right? So like those are specific things that we do because he told us. But there are other things like little promptings that will come up, and I can't explain it to you. You have to experience this with yourself. You just kind of have to get to know God and his voice. It's something that you have to learn just by spending time with him, by building up your faith, by spending time in the word, by spending time in prayer, by spending time with other believers. And when you feel those promptings, you go or you do what the prompting is. And I haven't shared this story on the podcast. This happened a little while ago. I've debated multiple times whether or not that I should share it, but I just feel like this is kind of a good little segue here. So I work with patients all day, every day. I sit in a room and I talk with each of my patients for 15 to 20 minutes. Just me and the patient typically. So I get to know my patients pretty well while I'm doing my job, checking their vision and doing different things to get them ready to go see our doctors. Through that, I do get to see patients in a lot of vulnerable states. I get to see patients in a variety of different emotional states. And I had one lady in particular who had just recently lost her husband, and she was undergoing a surgery, just had a lot going on, and she was really distraught, and she didn't even know if she should be there for her appointment today just because she had so much going on. And I just felt this prompting in my heart to pray with her, not to pray for her, to pray with her there in the room. So many thoughts went through my mind right there, like, is that going to be frowned? Like, am I allowed to do that? Are the doctors going to be mad if I do that? What if she tells me no? What if she doesn't believe or gets offended that I asked? And then they tell the doctors, and worst case scenario, I lose my job. All of those are obviously extremes, but they're going through my mind. But I felt that prompting to pray with her. And I can't tell you how fast my heart was beating, but when I finished up, I said, all right, I'm all set. But before I go to take you to see the doctor, I would just really like to pray with you, if that's okay. She started crying and she said, you're the second person in the last week that has offered to pray with me. And I don't know why, but I would really love that. And so I held her hand and we prayed. That was the end of it. I didn't necessarily lead her to Christ or anything like that, but I don't know where it goes after that. God will use that how he does. But that was just the prompting that I felt. And so I had a choice there to either listen and be obedient or to not do that, and that would be disobedience. So I can't describe how each prompting is going to come up for you, but it is going to be something between you and the Lord, and you just have to work at getting to know God better in order to understand that, and then you step when he directs you.
That's such a powerful story, and I'm really proud of you for doing that, and I think there's so much in that we can learn from. Where I'm coming from is kind of more of a everyday, kind of a mundane sort of stepping out in faith. I just think of what James says, where he says, faith without works is dead, implying that there is a natural in the supernatural. A lot of people think stepping out in faith is all in the supernatural and that there's only miracles or things that just come together in the moment. A lot of that comes to pass after acting out in faith in the natural. Just for example, like you're believing God for a job, yet you haven't brushed up your resume in years. You're believing God that you're going to med school, but you've only applied to a single school and gave up after applying to that school. You're believing that your body is going to get healthy and that this is the year that you're finally going to grow physically and to finally be in the body that you want to be in, yet you haven't renewed your gym membership or something like that. There are natural steps that you have to take in faith. You do these things in faith. You don't see what's coming on the other side and you don't know if it's even going to work, but you do it out of faith, out of this prompting that God has given you. Again, just with the little things, like if you're believing that you're going to write a book one day, you got to start writing. Like start writing right now. You don't need the publisher or anything like that. You don't need even the book title. You just start writing. If you believe that you're going to start podcasting, or if you believe you're going to start leading a small group or something, start calling people up and start doing things. You have to do things in the natural in order to receive the abundance that comes with the supernatural. It's in faith. So these little steps, it's not just in the big moments, though, Ryan, his story is just so beautiful about just these spontaneous in the moment events. But I really do think that Ryan's story and how we received this prompting came from daily choices that he has been making every day to follow God, and just the natural promptings. Like I'm going to wake up and I'm going to read Psalms and Proverbs and a chapter from the Old Testament, New Testament, and all these other things that Ryan does, and all these spiritual disciplines that he's very disciplined in. That moment that he experienced in the patient's room came from all of that. My biggest thing is kind of going back to what I was saying with the podcast, like just do it and start taking those steps in faith. And when you move in the natural, God comes to meet you in the supernatural. Like there's two realms here. We don't see the unseen realm. God is moving. What's that song say? Even if I don't see it, you're working. Even if I don't feel it, you're working. We have to trust that God is working as we work. What were we talking about? Working with God. So when we move in the natural, God moves in the supernatural. He meets you right there.
Well, thank you everyone who submitted questions. Hopefully we answered adequately for you, and if not, hopefully we directed you to episodes where we do share our thoughts in a little bit more detail. But we're just super appreciative of all of you guys that have come along this journey with us, so we wanted to answer some of the questions that you may have had while listening, and we really appreciate you submitting them. We really appreciate you listening. This was a lot of fun, so thank you again.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Our season finale is coming out this week, so be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube to catch up on all the previous episodes and to be notified when the final episode goes live. We'll see you one last time for the final episode of Beyond the Surface.